Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the Midlife Revolution. I'm your host, Megan Connor. And the Midlife Revolution has always been about making small changes that change everything. And tonight, I want to discuss a topic that is somewhat controversial in lots of different areas. And so I'm asking you, fellow revolutionaries, to open your mind to new ideas, to perhaps make a small change in the way that you think about our fellow human beings. As a member of the LGBTQ community, there are plenty of experiences that I can speak to in my time as a bisexual woman. But one of the things I can't speak to is the experiences of transgender people. I always felt like it was important to hear the perspectives of transgender people when speaking about transgender issues. So today's conversation is going to be with a fellow revolutionary, a mom friend of mine who has a transgender child. And my friend and I, we began our friendship online on Facebook, and then we found out that we lived in the same city. And we met up at the park a few weeks ago and had just a lovely conversation. She happens to also be a former member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the things that she mentioned to me was that when the new policies came out regarding transgender members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it was really hurtful to her and her family. And I wanted to listen to her experience because I wanted to understand what it was like as a parent of a transgender child to have these policies released and spoken about and to see the reaction from people who are actually experiencing this in their lives. So I think it's really important to listen to the voices of the people who are actually going through the experience. I think a lot of times it's hard for us to have empathy for a group of people unless we know someone who belongs to that group and we know about their experiences and their trials and their struggles and the things, the issues that they care about, what's most important to them. And that's why I'm excited about this conversation, because I want to hear from my friend Evelyn what is the most important thing to her in this conversation around transgender individuals. So before I bring Evelyn in, I want to talk a little bit about the policies that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has implemented with regard to transgender members. There was a change to the General Handbook back in August, and it's always interesting to me that a church has such an extensive handbook that's so specific about so many things. Because when I think about Jesus Christ, whether you believe he was divine or just a historical figure, I find it really interesting that his church needs to have a lot of guidelines and rules and regulations around how to treat people and how to deal with certain situations. So today we're going to dig into those handbook and policy changes and see how they affect people in real time. So now I would like to bring on my friend, Evelyn. Evelyn, welcome to the Midlife Revolution. How are you?
I'm in the right place.
Oh,
Let's
good.
revolutionize our midlives.
Yeah, and I always tell people, midlife doesn't have to be an age. It just has to be a season, a stage that you get to when you're like, let's start questioning some things and find out if I'm doing things the way I really want to.
Yeah, I think probably most people go through at least some sort of that, right?
Hopefully people go through it once or twice or maybe 3 times in their lives, because it would make me sad to think that the majority of people just put their blinders on and go through their lives from beginning to end without ever doing any sort of reflection like that.
I think it'd be really hard to do
Yeah.
without any sense of reflection, just with the way lives go.
Yeah, especially nowadays that you get inundated with so much information from sources you're not necessarily looking for. Like, I think back in the past that a newspaper got delivered to you, but you had to actually open it up and read it in order to get news and headlines. I feel like nowadays it just comes to us on our phone without us even asking.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your experiences as the mother of a transgender child and your experiences in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. what do you want to tell people by way of introduction?
Okay. I grew up in the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But when I was growing up in it, we could be Mormons. So I'm still Mormon in my little heart. Um, I grew up in New Mexico in a little town, and I had 5 brothers. I was the only girl, and church was everything. We did all the early morning seminary, and I went to a junior college in Thatcher, Arizona, and graduated from Institute. And then I went to BYU and got a degree from there, and was married in the temple in Mesa, Arizona to my husband. And then we had kids. Well, we waited 2 whole months. I told you that. We waited 2 whole months, and then had my first baby. Like, I was a mom by the time my 1-year anniversary came around. And I have 5 children total.
And I think that's pretty common, in LDS wise. It's like you think you're waiting if you wait a whole 2 months after your honeymoon to have a baby.
Yes, it's very intentional, very planned, very mature. And I was 22. So
I love it.
So raised kids really Orthodox in the church, did all the things, temple recommend holding member, traveled around a little bit, and then I'm in San Antonio, Texas now, and this is where my oldest child came out as transgender to me about 3 years ago. Freshman in high school, and it was right after COVID, going back to school. And it totally turned my world upside down. I remember thinking a long time ago that the hardest thing would be to have a transgender child, because it would be wrong and you would have parented incorrectly to like end up with that. And it would be so confusing. And I was just like really glad that that was never going to happen to me. And I am really glad it did happen to me, because I learned so much, and my transgender child is amazing. And I have just had to reevaluate my relationship with religion, with gender binaries, what it means to be a person, what it means to be happy, what it means to be true to yourself. And that all came through supporting my transgender kiddo in their journey to feeling at home in their body.
That's so amazing. I think what's amazing is that all of us as parents, I think we all have a certain view about how things are going to go and what kind of parent we're going to be. And then we have kids and we realize that these are human beings with individual personalities. And we have to adjust according to what our kids need. I think the hardest thing for me to see now is to see parents who don't change and adjust with the needs of their children. And I experienced that. I think my parents tried to parent each one of us kids the same. And when I became a parent and realized how different my kids were, I had that realization, like, oh, I'm going to have to do things completely differently. And it sounds like you had sort of a similar experience.
Right. Yeah. I was like, I have some learning and growing to do, and I need to find some resources. Typically, I would go to my bishop, stake president. If they didn't know the answers, I'd go there, ask Relief Society president, my parents, extended family members, but none of those people knew what to do with this situation. And the advice they had didn't resonate with me. It was like, it just went along with like conversion therapy kind of thing, or, it just was like, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't feel like the way we need to go here.
Yeah. And I had a similar experience with my bishop. And I think we talked about this before, how it's this realization that bishops have so little training. They have so little knowledge and understanding of things outside of their own sphere. And they are given, of course, a handbook, but we're going to get to this. When you're given a handbook of instructions, and that's where you're going to get your information, it is not the information is not complete, because you're not talking to actual people. And that's what I find so harmful about the handbook, is that it's written by these, this gerontocracy in Salt Lake City who's really isolated in a bubble where they get everything provided for them. And if their family members have struggles, there's a huge amount of resources that they have available to them that aren't available to just a regular members of the church. So the handbook is not being written by people who are having these real world experiences. And then the bishops are not trained well enough to be able to understand how to handle these problems. When I went to my bishop talking about the abuse that was happening in my life, he'd never experienced that. So he had no idea what to tell me to do.
In my bishop's defense, he did not recommend conversion therapy. That came from family. So he didn't give advice. He was quite affirming, actually. He was like, okay, we'll use the right names.
That's so great to hear.
He can go to young men's. He's like, I think he can even go to young men's camp. He was like, his first instinct was open arms and open heart. And I credit him for like approaching it that way. I think it was the right way to do it. And he didn't give any advice.
I love that. I'm so happy to hear that. That's amazing.
Yes. I've had run-ins with my bishop on other things, but not on that. He killed it. He did a great job. No notes. No notes for that one.
That's great. I love it. So I want to talk about sort of where your family was. This was 3 years ago. And what was the level of faithfulness in your family in general when your child came out to you?
My husband was all in. He was a board clerk or something. So he like attended bishopric meetings and everything. I was a little more nuanced because I was a woman and like realized that there were inequities, and I supported gay marriage. So I was like a little more nuanced, but definitely just thought like the church was still being revealed and was like needed to just be patient and wait for continued revelation. And I was, my calling at the time was stake girls camp committee, which was a high honor for our stake. So that was what my calling was at the time. And we were pretty new in our ward. But we'd been in the stake for a little while. We moved from another ward in the stake. So we had like friends and some connections, and we were just like full in, like every Sunday we went. At the time, my child was signed up for early morning seminary, doing that like on Zoom. They went to young women's activities. I had 2 teenage daughters before Gray came out as a boy. And so they went to young women's activities. We're fully active. We're doing all the things and praying before meals at home, like watched general conference, attended state conference. We were very devout.
Okay, so that's good to understand. And then was there a point at which Gray started to have some negative experiences, or did your faith transition come prior to that, or what was the timing?
No, it was Gray first. He
Okay.
did not like going to seminary, but we're like, who likes going to seminary, you know?
Nobody.
Keep going, it'll be fine. And then my boy would turn to 8. And I remember Gray did not want to go to his baptism. And we were like, please, like, just come support. You can wear whatever you want. Just like show up, support your little brother. And he was like despondent through that baptism. I cannot believe we made him go. I regret that now, because he was so uncomfortable. He was going through his faith transition. He deconstructed all of the history, and he was like, oh, my little brother's getting baptized into a cult. Like, and you couldn't tell us. We didn't have ears to hear that right now. He hadn't come out yet. So he was going through his faith transition as he was discovering his identity, and he wasn't doing it with us. But we weren't safe for him to do it with either. And we were like, you can study that stuff, but don't poison the well. Don't tell your siblings. Like, you keep that to yourself. Okay. I really regret the way we treated that. It was really insensitive, and he did not have a soft place to land with his faith transition at the time. And we didn't realize how much he was going through.
Yeah. I think that's pretty normal, teenage behavior and parent behavior. A lot of times we see that our kid is struggling in some way, or we suspect that they are, and we open the door, but they're not necessarily ready to walk through it. Or even maybe we don't open the door because we don't know what's going on. And it's a really hard sort of back and forth that happens when teenage kiddos are struggling, because we as parents, of course, we're going through our own things as well. And we don't always see all of the signs. At the same time, some kiddos are better at communicating their needs than others, So it's like when you're a parent and you see a kiddo that's struggling, you only have so many tools in the box that you can use before it also has to be that child's choice to come and talk to you and share with you about what's going on. Because in my experience, at least, the sitting down and saying, like, I know something is going on with you, I just want you to know that I'm here for you, I don't think that's ever gone well in my experience.
It doesn't really breed security, does it?
Yeah, like, it doesn't necessarily make it easier for them to talk about it. It's like, I love you, I'm not going to be mad at you, just tell me whatever, they still have to be ready.
Yeah. And we weren't ready. Like, there was never a point where I was going to be ready. So the way he told me was, we were going back to school shopping his sophomore year. And he, in the car, like, they had planned this, him and his siblings were like, okay, you're going to tell mom when you're doing this back to school shopping. So we were in the car. I was pregnant with my last baby. And he said, how do you feel that you're going to have another son? And I'm like, thinking he's talking about the baby. And I'm like, oh, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great. It's going to be different, but it'll be cool. He's like, no, you're going to have two sons. It was so confusing. And I was like, what are you saying? And I think he said I'm a boy, but at this point, like, my mind kind of got dizzy. And I was trying to figure out which aisle of the thrift store we were going to go down. Like, are we buying girls' clothes or boys' clothes? Like, what are we doing? I was just like trying to make it through this shopping trip. It's like, do you need boy underwear? That's like something I could cling to. And I was like, okay. So I'm like, okay, thanks for telling me. So we like tried to find a few pieces. And then I was like, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? Like, he's like, no. And like, we're both crying. He's like, no, mom, you did like great. Like, everything's fine. He was so scared to tell me. He was worried we were going to kick him out or send him to a conversion therapy camp or something.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, he was so brave.
Yeah, that is really brave. And it's hard to know as a kid how your parents are going to react. Because I think as children, we know some things about our parents, but we don't know everything. And we have heard some of what they've said to other people and about other people. So we have some clues of how we think they might handle certain things, but we don't really know ever. And I remember as a kid being scared every single time I had to tell my parents something. It didn't matter whether it was good news or bad news. It didn't, because in my house, nothing was safe, So it says a lot about you as a mom that he did feel safe to tell you, no matter how it went or what way. And it also says a lot about you that you were concerned that maybe you had reacted in a not so great way, because there's no handbook for this, although there are lots of experiences out there we can read about. But until it happens and until your kid actually says what they're going to say, you can't plan for every contingency. So it's really hard.
Yeah, it was really hard. I definitely didn't have a handbook for this one. We have a church handbook with zero guidance.
Yeah, this was not on my bingo card.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, we're going to figure it out. We'll just, we'll take it a step at a time. He had me tell my husband, and so that we could kind of ease into it. And it took a little time. We needed to like change pronouns and names, which felt like such an impossible first step. It took us a little while to get there. And then I started like, he, him, you're my son, which was a huge, like, parents go through this grief and it's like a whole thing, rewiring your brain to use different words and all the emotions that are attached with gender identity and hopes and dreams for that specific gender of child. So I just did the best I could. We took it a little bit at a time. And I'd kind of made peace with like, okay, oh, and he didn't want to go to church anymore. I'm like, oh yeah, you should not go to church. That like church is not safe for you. Stay home. We'll all go. You stay.
Mm-hmm.
And then that started to get really weird. My kids were hearing things in primary classes. They were having like lessons on family proclamation, hearing things that we weren't, believing at home. I had to like deprocess them every day after
Yeah.
church. What did you hear? It ended up by the end, all of my kids were with me in Relief Society because they didn't want to go to primary anymore.
Hmm.
And except Tess, my daughter went to Young Women's. She was still, and she really loved church.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my baby. So I'm just like full hands. And then my husband's ward clerking, like living the dream. He loved it. He loved it, his administrative duties and being important and serving. And he's just in the bro club, like feeling so good. So we were just like trying to make that work. And they had me speak at a stake relief society event about having a transgender child and how there's a place for you in the church.
Oh,
And
wow.
like, it's hard, but like you can do it if you want. Everyone was really affirming in our word. Everyone was really nice. I mean, the doctrine's tricky, but like,
Yeah.
I'm like carving out this space. They're kind of giving me a platform to speak. I'm having people tell me about their queer kids. So I'm feeling like good and kind of a sense of purpose at church.
Yeah.
And like,
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that, number one, that they gave you a platform to speak about your experience. And number two, that other parents were identifying with you.
it's so common, like having a
Yeah.
bisexual child or like the
Yeah.
numbers are just like the kids are
We
going to
don't,
keep coming
yeah.
and they're
And we
going to keep
don't,
coming to Mormon families.
yes. And we don't realize how common it is until we start talking about it and talking to other people.
Some of them were like teenagers, so we're
That's
like
awesome.
building this little kind of community of rainbow moms in the
That's
state.
awesome.
And it was really neat. Yeah, it was
I love
awesome.
that. I want to go back to one other thing because I want people to understand
Okay.
that you mentioned that you had some grief when you were processing through this new information. And I just want to normalize that. Like, it's okay for there to be grief for a parent around a child coming out as LGBTQ, because it
Yeah.
changes your expectations for what their life is going to look like. And that's not a bad thing. It's not like you're being disloyal to your child if you feel that grief. Like, it's perfectly okay to feel that.
Yes, it's totally normal. Most parents do. I'm a member of lots of online groups for parents. The one thing you don't want to do is project that grief onto your child. Go ahead and process that in those parent groups or with your therapist, and don't put that on your child. So,
Yeah.
fortunately,
That
I think I did a pretty good job, but I didn't know that. So, I would give that advice if a parent
yeah.
has this come out to them.
Yeah, and that's I've heard it referred to, like, whether you're grieving, no matter what you're grieving about, that there's like there are concentric circles. Like, the person who is experiencing the thing is at the very center, and you as their parent are on the next circle out. And then your siblings and parents and friends are on the next circle out, and then it keeps going. So you don't go to the cancer patient to express your grief about their cancer. You go to the next circle out. You go to friend groups or parents or your siblings or whatever. You don't go to your child and tell your child how much you're grieving about
Right.
this thing.
Yeah.
So I love
Put it
that
on the
advice.
person who's experiencing it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You had just had your
So,
baby,
had my baby.
and
Got
Gray was
little
not going to church anymore because you talked
right.
about that's not a safe place for
So
you.
I'm just like sharing. So I'm really under the intention at this time that I'm going to be the change from the inside. I'm going to educate my ward. I'm going to educate my church leaders, and we're going to make this a better, more inclusive place. And they want to hear my great ideas. They trust me as a mom. I'm the expert, and everyone's going to be so excited with all of this knowledge that I am really willing and ready to share with my Relief Society sisters or in my testimonies or just
Yeah.
anywhere that I can open my mouth.
That's such a great and wonderfully naive point of view. I mean, I love,
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying naive in a bad way at all. I'm saying, like, how wholesome that is. This is a church that we grew up in, one in which we were told that we were accepting everybody, that we were inclusive of everybody, that we could share our struggles together. And then
And the God I believed in, like, truly, like, I'm feeling revelation in the doctor's offices. I'm feeling so good about where we're going. Like, it's hard, but that doesn't mean it's bad. And so I'm just feeling like this blossoming of who I am and my understanding. And of course, people would want to know all about all the things I'm learning. My bishop can't wait to hear about it. My stake president just is waiting for me to come and tell him about my new light and knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's like my intention, and like I'm like feeling good, like kind of activism-y. And so I am on the girls camp, state girls camp committee. The first thing that happened with that, where I had a run-in with the leadership, was they told me I couldn't bring my nursing baby to girls camp. And I was like, could you just tell me why that is? Like, well, we haven't had babies in the past. I'm like, well, in the past, America had segregation, and it was that way until it wasn't. So like, could you give me like maybe a good, like a reason? And there was no reason. It was just like, you know what? It's fair. We've already told other moms they can't bring their babies. You can't bring your baby. We'll reevaluate it for next year. I was like, that is not a reason.
No, it's not.
Not a reason.
So it's dogma. It's just, this is the way we've always done it. So we're not going to make a change or an exception.
I was unhappy that it was a man telling me what to do with my body and how to care for my family. And at this point, I am differentiating between what is good for me and my family versus what the church doctrines and policies are. Yeah. I've had a lot of therapy. I've sent my kids to crisis centers. I am feeling a lot of confidence and empowerment, and knowing what the right thing is for me, and that everyone should like support that as I would support them in what is right for them. Yeah. So I go into girls camp with a little chip on my shoulder, honestly, that I can't bring my baby. So I am pumping my milk in front of any priesthood holder. I'm being a little saucy with
you, Evelyn, are a revolutionary.
Like, if this is going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be uncomfortable for everyone. Yeah. And then the next day, my daughter wore a tank top to girls camp. I didn't even notice. I was like, my daughter's at girls camp. I love it. I love having you here. Just have a great time. And I was asked to have her change. And I didn't realize in this stake that was what they did. I hadn't been told that in our trainings or anything, that like if girls don't follow the dress code, which I didn't like anyway, that we asked them to change. And I felt it was such a violation. So I did it out of obedience, but it was like traumatic for both of us. It was so awful. We're crying. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, that's so awful. I'm never asking anyone to change again.
Yeah. So just to clarify for people who might not be familiar, when young women go to girls camp between the ages of 12 and 18, there are many locations that are very strict about what the girls are and are not allowed to wear. And the ideal is always getting ready for the temple. And so a lot of church groups, on the stake level or the area level, will impose a dress code on young women that prepares them to wear temple garments, which I think is really wrong and harmful anyway. Like, just let kids be kids, So where I went, some of my girls' experiences where I went to girls' camp, you could only wear a one-piece bathing suit. Later on, my girls had to wear basketball shorts because they had to be knee length. It sounds like in your circumstance, there were no tank tops allowed because they show shoulders.
Yeah, and no tank tops. This year, and no crop tops. That was a big deal because I was in style. And this year, they weren't policing the shorts. That was like the thing they gave. So like shorts of any length.
Yeah. So, but the reason that we were told that at girls' camp we had modesty standards was because there was going to be a priesthood leader present at girls' camp. And this is the thing I always thought was so creepy and wrong and gross. It's like the young women's leadership are all adult women. And obviously the girls, 12 to 18, it's all girls. But we're not allowed to have an activity for the church, unless a priesthood holder is present at all times. And so a priesthood holder would be like a bishop, pretty much any man. They could call any man, but usually they do somebody from the stake presidency or one of the bishops. And they would tell us, like, because this man is going to be on the property, we want women to be covered up.
And I
And
never
that
actually man say it. It was always women enforcing that rule. It was the same
Yep.
for you? Yeah.
Yes, it was the same for me, which again is harmful because even the female leadership is not calling out what's wrong with this. And they're telling us we have to enforce this rule because the underlying implication, I never heard it. Well, that's not true. I did hear it say that my body is a temptation to men, and I have to cover it up so that I'm not a temptation to men. I don't think they're as explicit in saying that nowadays, but the policy hasn't changed, that they want young women
We
covered
did
up when
have a
there's
little
going
bit
to
of
be a
that.
man around.
Absolutely. We did have a little
Yeah.
of that and like protecting the men that were there and just following the FSY handbook.
Yeah, for the Strength of Youth pamphlet that basically dictates everything that young men and young women are supposed to do, think, act, all of that stuff.
Oh, the contradictory thing in our stake was at the stake boys camp, they had kilts and they didn't wear anything under their kilts. And a lot of them didn't have shirts on and they had met prior. So it was a total double standard. Anyway,
Yeah.
so the tank top issue comes. I asked her to change, and then I decided I'm never doing that again. The next day, she's reading the story about Esther, and the first wife of that Pharaoh guy. I don't think
Yeah.
that's his name.
The king.
The king.
Yeah.
He calls her to come before him, and she says no. I'm not coming. And then he divorces her. And then that's when Esther comes in. And my daughter was so inspired by that. And she's like, I am putting back on my tank top. And when they tell me to change, I am going to say no. I was like, okay. So now we're doing nonviolent protests. So when they tell you no, you can't like react. You have to be really cool about it. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think they've ever had anyone say no to them before. So they send you home. There may be further consequences. I'm not really sure. So we just have to like prepare ourselves for whatever happens after that.
Yeah.
And so she did. She wore her tank top. They did send her home. It ended up being her ward leaders who made that call. And I drove her home. And I felt really bad about it. And then I was just like thinking like, this is so bad. Like she's in her room crying. That was really traumatic. She was sent away from from her community. I don't feel good about it. Like, what can I do to help reconcile this? I was like, I have to go back with her in a tank top tomorrow. I need to get her back there. I need to get her back with her community. And she'll go if I wear one too, because she won't be alone.
Yeah.
So I
love that you wore a tank top tonight just to show us exactly how
the
scandalous those shoulders are.
They're really saucy. They ruin everything. It was like a high neck, even wider shoulders than this one. I wore that tank top into the mess hall. It was the scariest thing I've ever done. That is literally the scariest thing I've ever done, is being defiant in that way, like showing my body a physical representation, not saying a word and just showing up and going about my business.
Yeah.
The Stake and Woman president comes running to the little class where I'm teaching the kids how to make jewelry. And she's like, Evelyn, outside right now. We cannot have this. You cannot. We are not doing this.
That's so awful for an adult woman to treat another adult woman that way.
I really did want them to know what it was like to say it to an adult, though. Like,
yeah,
because it's easier if you're saying it to a child, you have power over them. But if you're talking to an equal, it felt different.
Yeah.
And for me to say, this is a really bad rule. If Jesus was here, he would not ask me to change my shirt. We shouldn't be sending girls away for it. Please change the rule. Please change the rule. And she's like, I can't change it. I can't change the rule. You can't. I was like, you can. You're the only one who can. You're the young women's president. Like, that's it. You have to change it. And I really don't think she would. I think she had her marching orders from the stake presidency. I wasn't aware of all that. She kind of, she was really sweet. Like, it wasn't about her at all. I don't really have hard feelings against her. She was put in an impossible situation.
Yeah, but the hard part about that is that she literally can't change the rule because her rules come to her from the stake presidency, from the men. So if she wanted to change the tank top rule, she would have to go petition the stake presidency, the men, in order to ask them if it's okay if she changes the rule. So she had no power in that situation. She could have I mean,
She
to
could
be
have.
fair,
She could have just said,
could
you know
have.
what? I'm changing the rule. And
Yeah.
then she would have faced her consequences, which I know how that feels. There are
Exactly.
consequences, and she wasn't ready.
Yeah,
She could,
exactly.
because I got released from that calling so fast. You have never been released more efficiently from a calling than when you wear a tank top to girls' camp.
That's so sad too.
I know. I was extra released. It was like really apparent. Like, I will
With
never
prejudice.
have to be again.
Released with prejudice.
But Megan, it really did relate to this transgender thing that I had gone through, because if I am going to allow my child to choose their name and their gender, of course I'm going to let my child choose their shirt.
Yeah.
It's harmless.
Yeah.
Or whatever you'd like. So I couldn't be hypocritical in my own life. Like, I'd come too far.
Yeah.
To say you have to wear I just couldn't. It was just a bad rule. It was like, we're objectifying women. It was just bad. Anyway, they changed the rule. Long story short. Long story short.
Long story short.
That's what
we're gonna call this.
More in my stake.
We're gonna call this episode "Long Story Shirt."
Long story short, short sleeves.
Short sleeve shirt. But I just want to point out, this is so ironically funny and not funny. It's horrible and sad. But this is the way the church operates. Somebody speaks out against a rule and you got extra released. Some people get excommunicated, right? When Sam Young advocated for parents to be allowed to be in interviews with their children when the bishop is asking them about their sexual behavior, Sam Young advocated for that, and he got excommunicated. And then what did they do? They changed the rule to reflect exactly what he was asking for. But they had to make an example of him first, because it can't be Sam Young's idea. It has to be the prophet's idea. It's like, how dare you buck the authority? It was kind of a good idea. We're going to do it anyway, but not until we punish you first. Mm-hmm. It's just awful.
I know.
That should never have happened to you.
Traumatized. I know. It's unfortunate, but I learned a lot. I'm actually glad it happened. It taught me a lot about myself, and I won't die. People don't have to like me. I can displease like everyone, and look, I'm still alive. Whoa.
Yeah.
My hands are still here.
So you got extra released, but then they changed the rule. And then how did this affect your ability to engage in activism on Gray's behalf?
So at this point, I'm really having a hard time with church. Right now, I'm like bumping into the patriarchy, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Yeah. It's really hard to navigate in that space and feel whole and safe. And so I joined a faith expansion group with Valerie Hamaker, and she owns a platform, Latter-day Struggles, and she has a podcast and groups. So I joined that group, and Ian joins with me as a support person. I'm the one in crisis or whatever, and he's the one just being a good husband, here to listen. And he starts listening to people's experiences with patriarchy, the word that he didn't actually quite understand, and had to ask, what do you all mean by patriarchy? And he got like 5 hours of stories. And then he started to kind of have a change, and the SEC issue happened. He's an accountant, starts looking into church history. Anyway, he was done in a month. It was like so fast for him. He just deconstructed. But before he was done, he went to the bishop and was like talking to him about his issues. And they were like, well, we heard your podcast. Oh, did I say we were on the podcast? So we were on Valerie's podcast.
Okay. Got it.
As parents of a transgender child, once again, queer children. And we're just talking about how hard it is to love your child with this theology that it doesn't make it easy.
Right.
And we were pretty kind. I think it was just really heartfelt, vulnerable, tender conversation with another couple that has a gay son, and sharing our experiences as parents, and our love for our church and our love for our child, and how hard it is to navigate it. But after that, I think there was talk about maybe discipline for me, because now I'm like speaking vocally about things, and they didn't realize Ian was on the same page as me. That wasn't a good look for us.
They just thought you were a rebellious woman.
Yeah, poor Ian. He's married to this saucy witch lady, whatever. But now he realizes, like, oh, we're like united and we're in this together. And they were going to release him from the bishopric and stuff. So it all kind of came crumbling down really fast after that podcast. And I had no interest in church discipline. Like, some people really like thinking that they're going to get excommunicated, and like, good for them. But it feels so spiritually violent to me. It's just not something I want to participate in at any level. So I didn't want them to have any power over me. So I removed my name from the church and stuff so that I could just say what I wanted and not have to worry about having that hanging over my head.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad you just empowered yourself by just taking charge of that process.
Yeah. I'll just make that decision for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I am now. And I'm still really active online. I love Mormonism. I love it even more now that I can learn all the real history. It's so fascinating. Cool traditions. It's my family heritage all the way back to Joseph Smith. So it's like, I call myself a heritage Mormon because it's
cultural Mormon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it's part of, and my parents are still in. I have brothers who are still in, extended family and everything. So, and like, good for them. But I would like it to be a safer place, because it's like leaving a building that's burning, but you're like, oh, there's kids inside.
Yeah.
And just wanting to put the fires out so that it's a good place for the people who need to stay there. Yeah. I just want it to be like a better
I agree with that. I love that perspective too. So when the transgender policy came out in August, your whole family was already out. Is that true? Or just do you still have a daughter who goes?
Out, like totally out. No. I'm the only one whose name is removed. And like, for non-Mormons, like, who cares? Where does it matter where your name is? But we are a bureaucracy, and Mormon God really loves where your name is. So
yeah.
It matters a lot.
For me, it was really important to me that they not be able to continue to count me, you know, that, and it was like, I don't want my name on the records. I don't want there to be evidence that I'm affiliated with this organization at all, because I'm not. I wanted to be able to have just to have that, I don't know, personal integrity, to be able to say to people, I want nothing to do with this organization. I didn't just quiet quit. Unfortunately, I did burn some things down. I may have lit some things on fire on my way out, which I'm not totally 100% proud of. I would have done it differently now, but I am glad that I had my name removed, because I don't want it counted.
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't super graceful with my exit either. There are things I would have done differently, but it was part of the process, and I did the best I could. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I did the best I could with what I understood at the time. And I had never spoken to anyone who had left the church. Not really.
Whoa.
Like, I knew I had a really good friend whose husband had left, but she was still in. And I had like polite conversations with him, but never a conversation about his apostasy.
True.
Which is just a word that Mormons use to shame people who've left the church. It's like,
I never did either. People left and I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I never asked a question. I felt so bad about that after I left. I was like, wow, it's really hard to leave. I really wish I would have asked you about that.
Yeah. And I also wish that I had been more vocal about my struggles with the culture and the policies, because once I did leave and I was very public about it, so many people reached out to me and said, oh, I wish we could have talked. There was one lady in particular who was a great, great friend of mine, who we were in the primary presidency together. And I remember her being very vocal about things that she didn't like. And I was like, good for you, because I hate it too. But at the time I was I was struggling with my cognitive dissonance too much to speak up about it. But then when I left and she told me how she really felt, I was like, I could have had a really good friend. Like, we really could have supported each other in our struggle. And, we just didn't. Neither one of us knew. So I don't know. I don't know what makes that better, because it is so unsafe to say how you really feel if you don't know how someone else really feels. So I think there has to be, somebody has to be brave enough to say, I'm really struggling with this. And I did do that when the exclusion policy came out in 2015. I did say how much I was struggling with it, but it was during this kind of public meeting where there were 3 or 4 other people who were struggling too, but we never talked to each other about it afterwards, because I think the assumption was we hate this and it sucks, but what are we going to do about it? Like, it's just what God wants right now, I guess. I don't know. It was so hard.
It is so hard. I wish I would have had like a little more model of resiliency, instead of like get out when it's not safe. That's what I'd say. And
Yeah.
maybe that's what I would have chosen anyway. But Ian didn't have it either. So I don't know. It would have, there really is something to say for people who are like speaking up within,
Definitely.
with being active. And it's really brave and cool.
Yeah, it's totally brave. It's totally cool. And I wish that I had known there were so many resources out there for people who are struggling when I was really struggling, because I think I would have been, I think I would have had less of a difficult time with my transition out of the church if I had known there were resources, and if I could have like secretly been listening to podcasts or other,
Mhm.
or reading other materials, or even being on the ex-Mormon subreddit and knowing how many people were out there struggling. I think it would have made my time easier, but as it was, I felt like I was totally alone. I had no idea what resources were out there, and I didn't even really know where to look or what to do, because all I knew is that I was doing my own research and I was finding these terrible things out. And I was like, I know there's got to be an ex-Mormon community out there somewhere, but I didn't have any clue how to access it or to do anything other than just by myself. So I just wish I had known.
Mm.
Because now that I'm out here in this space, I see all kinds of people in all kinds of circumstances, some who are fully in the church going every single Sunday, even though they don't cognitively believe. And I was like, I didn't even know that was something. I didn't even know that was a place you could get
That's an
to,
option, right?
you know? So yeah, I just wish I would have known there are lots of different options and lots of different ways to make, to be at peace with how you feel about your faith and everything.
Mhm.
So I kind of want to skip to when the new policy came out in August. Your whole family's out of the church. Your nuclear family, right?
Mhm.
And I want to understand how this policy affected you and affected Gray when you've got other family members, extended family members who are still believing. And what other things do you want to talk about, or do you want people to know about your experience and Gray's experience?
A little more with Gray's experience, just some things he did. He went on the stake trek where they like LARP, handcart pioneers,
They play being pioneers,
like
pushing their hand carts
cosplay.
across the plane.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he did
dress up
that
and everything.
as a transgender boy and had a nice time. Like he didn't
Good.
believe any of it, but he just thought it would be a fun thing. He's like, religion's so weird anyway. Like this is just one more weird thing to do. Like it'll be fun. And he did
Now
have a nice time.
was it overnight?
Yes. And it was
Okay,
overnight and he was able to do that. We kind of had some back and forth on where he'd sleep, but he ended up being able to sleep like with the young men. Ian went as a leader to just like make sure things went smoothly and he had a place to change, and
yeah,
made sure that he was like doing boy things with the boys and whatever.
yeah,
So he had a nice time, and there were like weird things, but overall he was included. His mom, pa, super nice, used proper name, pronouns, the whole bit.
good.
So
That's great.
yeah. And that was our stake and bishop who like made that happen for him.
Good.
And so I give them a lot of credit there.
Yeah.
With this policy, they would not have been able to include him in that way. He definitely would have not been able to stay overnight. If he went, he would have had to go with the girls and like dress in a dress. He just wouldn't have come. So
Yeah.
the policy, when I first heard it, my first reaction was, oh, I'm so glad I'm gone. I made the right decision. They're saying all the quiet things out loud. I don't ever have to wonder where we are again.
Right.
And then as time went on, I got really angry and sad. It's like, okay, well, when my dad dies and has a Mormon funeral and we go to his funeral, technically my child should not be able to use the bathroom that he feels most comfortable in. Like, I don't think anyone would enforce that because Mormons aren't assholes like that.
Most of them
are non-confrontational, which serves everyone's, like, serves much to my advantage, but they could, and the policy would back it up.
Right.
And it just makes it hard. And I feel like, okay, all of my believing family members, do they agree with this policy? Like, if they're not vocally opposed to it, I assume that they're okay with it. And that makes me feel bad. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like I have people on my side. And maybe they shouldn't have to like be vocal about it, but I feel really alone out here.
Right.
And could really use that support and
Yeah.
know you have my back.
Right. Especially when you have believing family members, you do have to re-engage with the culture sometimes. And the funeral example is a perfect example of that, where, you know, the policy, it's like you say, people are confrontational, but the policy makes it so that you have to have a confrontation at some point. And it's either going to be your son going into the restroom and somebody saying, "Hey, hey, you can't go in there," or it's going to be a leader or somebody, is they're going to have to make a choice of whether or not they're going to speak up and say something to your child. And unfortunately, as a mom, you have no like control over when or where that's going to happen.
Yeah. And using
So,
the bathroom for a transgender person is already terrifying.
right, right. I can imagine. I mean,
It's
I
really
can't.
scary. Every gas station, every
Yeah.
doctor's like, it's just living life, being able to use the bathroom that is in our, it's just a privilege. We don't think about it, but when it's taken away, it's so dehumanizing.
Yes. And let me just say, like, I hate public restrooms anyway. They're terrifying to me. Like, why can we not? I went into a restroom the other day that was a room. Like, the stall was a room. There was a door that went all the way to the floor and all the way to the ceiling. Why can we not make all of our restrooms like this? Why do we have little gaps in the sides where people can literally see everything that's going on? Like, that's terrifying to me anyway. I hate it. And so I said in a moment ago, I can imagine. I actually can't imagine. Like, it's terrifying for me. I can't imagine what it would be like for a transgender person to be worried about people looking in the stall, following them into the restroom. Like, I would be, if it were me, probably I would be very paranoid about people constantly looking at me, following me, trying to see what I'm doing. I can't imagine how scary that must be for someone. And I also think that it is so harmful that certain groups of people have perpetuated these myths about bathroom use. And I know we've talked about this before, but I just want to address this. Like, as a mother, I didn't ever let my kids go into the public restrooms by themselves, Like, if I was with if I had my boys with me and my husband wasn't there, I would bring my boys into the women's restroom with me. So I'm not sending my 5 to 10-year-old son into a men's restroom alone when I don't know who's in there and I have no way of going in there to find that out. So I probably brought my boys with me into restrooms a lot later than most moms did, just because I had an experience of being SA and I didn't want there to be any opportunity for any of that to happen. And so I was nervous about men's restrooms for my boys, and I never let my girls go into the women's restroom alone, until they were probably, I don't know, 11 or 12.
Mhm.
And it's just because of my personal experience. I always wanted to know who was in there. I wanted to be in there with them in case they needed me for something. And so I think this idea that, like, by allowing transgender to use the restroom that feels the most comfortable for them, we're not we should not be any less safe. We should not feel any less safe in a restroom. I don't know. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah. So actually, the stats show that transgender people are more likely to experience physical or sexual assault. And the perpetuators of this assault are straight men. So if we really were worried about a specific gender demographic and keeping everyone safe, we would never have men at girls' camp. Those are the ones who
Mhm.
do the harm. We would
Yeah.
make sure there were women at young men's camp to supervise the men because they're the
Right.
icky. So it's
Mm.
hypocritical and it's not based on data. And it's saying the quiet part out loud. We think transgender people are icky and dangerous, and we can't be around them. We can't trust them. They're
Right.
untrustworthy.
Right.
When the reality is transgender people are brave, they're compassionate, they've overcome a lot of really hard things. They're exactly who you would want to have around your children or to be in a religious space, sharing you their talents and their insight and their compassion and love and all the cool things that they have to offer. That would be the kind
Yeah.
of person who would make the community a more beautiful, healed, balanced place.
Yeah.
And it is a loss to the community that they're denying transgendered humans a place. Before, it wasn't even good, right? It wasn't even good. Like when my son told me he didn't want to go, I'm like, oh, good. I don't want you there. It's so gender binary. But people were making it work. They were finding places
Yeah.
within their wards. They were able to go to like Relief Society and Elders Quorum and like kind of make a little place for them. With this policy, all of that goes away.
Right.
All that safe place is gone. They're not
Right.
going to show up because they're not crazy. They know you don't want them there. They see it. So
Yeah.
it's a huge loss.
I agree with you. It is a huge loss. And it also just perpetuates the myth of people who don't understand what transgender is, what it means, you know, who
The people who
transgender
need
people are.
exposure the most are
Right.
making it where they're never going to have to acknowledge it
Right.
or face
Right.
it or confront that bias
Right.
within themselves and grow.
Yes, and I have a theory and a suspicion, although I am not a mental health professional, I don't have any licensing of any kind, but my suspicion is that the reason that there is so much violence perpetuated against transgender people by white men, white straight men, is because whenever we see somebody with a characteristic that we think is icky, it's usually because there's something in ourselves that we haven't acknowledged or confronted. And Carl Jung refers to this as doing shadow work. Like when a trait comes up that we don't like about ourselves, we start seeing that trait in other people. Or the reverse of that usually is that if I see something I don't like about someone else, it's probably because I haven't confronted that thing in myself. And so I suspect that there are a lot of straight white men who have some kind of feeling of not belonging or not being accepted for what they think or feel, and that causes them to feel rage and shame, and they end up taking it out on the groups of people that reflect the things that they don't like in themselves.
So I'm in a group where we break down patriarchy. There's this book we're reading. Well, I'm reading it. Our mentor's reading it. It's still Valerie Hammaker.
Yeah.
The point is that everyone suffers under patriarchy because it creates imbalances of structure. And one of the things this book points out is that we all suffer in different ways. So like men have gender trauma as well. The victims of men violence are mostly other men, accounting for 80% of male violence. Men commit suicide about 4 times more than women. So like men are hurting. So I think you're right about that. Then the LGBTQ, the stats are so astronomical on the violence that is committed towards them. LGBTQ plus people experience about 4 times more violence than non-LGBTQ plus people. And America is a very violent society. Like, think about that. That's it. They're not the ones perpetuating it. They're the recipients of it. And like, it's hurting people. The hurt people are hurting people. And then like, of course, if you are a person of color, it's worse. 60% of Black girls are sexually abused before their 18th birthday. That's incredible. That's astronomical. That's over half.
Yeah.
And then the traumas on women, which I think are spoken to more often. But the point is, like, these structure imbalances, they're hurting all of us. Yeah. So the other thing that creating this policy does is groups like having someone to target and hate, and that sort of brings unity to everyone else. Like if you can point to the LGBTQ people and say, that is Satan and that is the world and that is evil, then we all feel really good in our marriages with straight cisgendered people. We're like, oh good, I'm God. God bless you. But the reality is that's not true. If there is a God, God clearly loves all of us equally, and the power structure isn't reflective of that love. So it's like it's like the Wizard of Oz, kind of like we've created this weird world where we have like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, but the reality is it's hurting all of us. Like it's hurting the wizard, it's hurting the people, it's hurting Glinda. Like none of us are able to be balanced and authentic and real as long as we're othering people and kicking people out of girls' camp and not letting moms breastfeed their babies. And it's always a man deciding this. Like, I don't think that feels good for the man. I don't think it
No.
does. It hurts them. I think it wounds
Right.
them at a spiritual level and doesn't develop them as well. It creates them, they like become monsters.
Yeah.
So we need to just like, we're all equal. We are all loved, infinitely loved and lovable. And can we just create a place where everyone is welcome for who they are and the talents and gifts that they have to offer? And like, bathrooms aren't that big a deal, and they're the least sexy place on the planet. So like,
Yeah. 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 I totally agree. Well, Evelyn, you have some really beautiful thoughts. You're a beautiful person. I'm so grateful that we've gotten to know each other. So
okay. Thanks, Megan. Have fun reading that legal jargon.
I sure will
That
not.
nonsense.
It is nonsense. My brain cells melt every time I have to look at the handbook.
Like, who wrote this? Not a woman. I don't think there
Definitely
was a
not a
woman
woman.
on that handbook committee. Can I tell you that?
Probably not. We should include the women. What do you think? And they all go, I think that sounds great.
Whatever you say. Doesn't matter what I think anyway. You're going to
Yeah.
overrule it.
You know what, brethren? I feel you're inspired, and I'm gonna let you go ahead and make the decision.
I just trust God
I
called you
just
for a reason. And I just am blessed to sustain. Amen.
Amen. Dig into what the church handbook says about the new transgender policy from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that was released in August of 2024. I wanted to dig into a little bit of the science, or a little bit of some of the science that has informed me a little bit more about what's going on with our food supply and our hormones. Pictured on the left is Dr. Casey Means. Dr. Means is a Stanford trained physician. She graduated with honors from Stanford University and she completed her medical training at Stanford Medical School. She initially specialized as a head and neck surgeon, but then during her surgical residency, she started questioning the conventional approach to medicine. And she realized that a lot of what she was taught at Stanford Medical School and what she practiced in surgery did not address any of the root causes of chronic diseases, particularly those related to diet, lifestyle, and metabolic health. She talks a lot about how she learned very little about the scientific literature on why people get sick. And instead, she was focusing, as they were teaching her to do, on symptom management rather than prevention or root cause analysis. Now, this particular video that I'm about to share is from an appearance that she and her brother, Callie Means, made on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I'm only going to play a very, very short clip of this because I'm acting in accordance with YouTube's fair use policy where we can comment on other videos that are posted on YouTube. But prior to the clip that I'm going to play for you, which is very short, Joe Rogan had asked Dr. Means, which again, she's on the left and her brother Callie is in the front there. Joe Rogan asked her, why is it that females are experiencing puberty at younger and younger ages? And Dr. Means talks about how alarming it is that puberty is starting as many as 5 years younger than puberty started 10 years ago, for example. And that's an alarming change to have such a drastic change over such a short period of time. She talks about the fact that since 1902, we have produced 8 billion tons of plastics. She says that microplastics are everywhere. We can't possibly avoid them. They are now in the air. They recently did a study where they tested the placentas of mothers who had recently given birth, and they found that 100% of the placenta that they tested had microplastics in the placenta, which means that they're getting into our children's bloodstreams even before they're born. She goes on to relate that when plastics break down, they act like an extra estrogen molecule, which can bind to our estrogen receptors and act like estrogen. So, in other words, our bodies believe that they're receiving more estrogen hormone and they're going to behave like they're being oversaturated with estrogen. She goes on to say that we pump 70 million pounds of pesticides into our food supply every single year. The chemical that's in these pesticides that is so troubling is atrazine. Atrazine is a form of aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. So not only are microplastics making our bodies react as though we have an overabundance of estrogen, but we're also consuming food that's been sprayed with a chemical that changes our testosterone into estrogen. So we're not getting enough testosterone either. These pesticides are illegal in Europe, but for some reason, we've decided in the United States that it's okay to use these chemicals on our food supply. In addition, Dr. Means talks about the fact that birth control pills are now being prescribed for all kinds of things that are not related to reproductive health, like acne, for example. This overuse of birth control early on is driving some of this early onset puberty in young women. The last point that she makes is that we as a population consume so much sugar, and sugar drives the hormonal response. She talks a lot about the symptoms of polycystic ovary syndrome as being type 4 diabetes, meaning that the symptoms of polycystic ovary syndrome are related directly to the amount of carbohydrates and sugars and simple sugars and processed foods that we as a population consume. Then she had this final point to make.
Where it's tons of estrogens. It's not like there's a bunch of exogenous testosterones, right? It's not like the plastics are also stimulating testosterone. So you've got these estrogens, then we're barreled with sugar, and it's literally like it's in our kids' school lunches, there's sugar everywhere. Sugar is driving the visceral fat in kids, which is turning estrogen to testosterone. So it's like we live in a world that's basically feminizing us, which for women, that's going to make puberty early. For men, it's going to feminize them.
So you can draw your own conclusions, and I highly recommend that you go and listen to the Joe Rogan podcast episode with Dr. Casey Means and her brother Callie Means. I also recommend that you listen to their conversations on other podcasts. They have lots of other instances where they talk about the food supply and how it's making us sicker, and how Big Pharma has partnered with Big Food to basically medicate us and keep us sick so that we'll keep buying medication and keep being dependent upon medication. So you can draw your own conclusions from what Dr. Means has said. As for me, her last statement was just very telling. For women, it's making puberty happen sooner. For men, it's feminizing men. There's no wonder that we're seeing a rise in the number of transgendered individuals, in the number of people with body dysphoria. If you have an XY chromosome and you're not receiving enough testosterone, of course, you're not going to feel at home in your body. This may be a controversial opinion, but it's just something I wanted to put out there, that the science is supporting that these issues are not going away and that they are based in scientific and biological research. Now I would like to go to the policy changes. The first thing that I'm going to share with you is an article that was posted on the LDS.org newsroom. So you can see that we're on the church website here, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, newsroom.churchofjesuschrist.org. This is a news article that the LDS Church published in its own newsroom, and it's titled Frequently Asked Questions to Clarify the August 2024 General Handbook Updates. This article is dated the 19th of August 2024, and at the earliest, these handbook changes came out on the 1st of August. So I have a little bit of doubt about whether or not these are frequently asked questions, or whether they're just questions that the LDS Church anticipated that members were going to ask when they came out with these handbook changes. Now, you can see they are portraying this picture of two people hugging. We don't know what their genders are, but it looks like one is older, one is younger. They could possibly be both female. I have no idea. But the point is, we don't really know who these two people are. It's just a picture of two people hugging in church. And it sort of reinforces this idea that these changes are a happy thing, that we're embracing the changes. There is no secret, there is no mistake behind their marketing. So first, what is the purpose of the church's general handbook? It says it provides guidance for general and local leaders worldwide. It continues to be a digital document with regular updates at least twice a year under the direction of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Now, I've since learned, and I could be wrong about this, but the research that I have seen shows that the General Handbook is written mostly by attorneys And of course, it's discussed with the first presidency and a quorum of the 12 apostles. But I think the process is that basically they tell their attorneys that they'd like to make some policy changes or some updates to the handbook, and the attorneys write the copy as to what is actually going to appear there. And oftentimes when members have questions about things, especially if they're particularly complicated questions about sensitive issues, their church leaders are going to refer the people back to the handbook to look up what the handbook says. Now, wait until you see this. If you've never looked at the church handbook, I've often questioned why an organization that bears the name of Jesus Christ needs such a complicated handbook, but we're going to get into it here in just a second. Number 2, the question is, what changes were made to the policy for streaming and holding virtual church meetings? Like, nobody cares about this part. That was insensitive. I shouldn't say that nobody cares, but this is definitely not the most sweeping change. And we're going to see that they've taken the new transgender policy and they've buried it all the way at the bottom. The next one is about wearing and caring for the garment. The next one is about welcoming visitors to sacrament meeting. They think that they're throwing the young women a bone here. The young women are not allowed to have any priesthood responsibilities. And so now they're saying a member of the bishopric invites young women class presidencies to organize youth to minister by welcoming visitors and members as they enter the chapel. So it's like, we're not going to let you pass the sacrament, young women, but you can greet people as they come into the chapel. How's that? Does that make you feel better about not having the priesthood? Anyway, I digress. Only hold sacrament meeting on Easter. So only sacrament meeting, only 1 hour of meeting. And during the week of Christmas. I just remember that when Christmas fell on a Sunday in the past, that we would only have sacrament meeting and then we would go home. And most of the time my parents would make us, I think it happened two times when I was growing up, and my parents would make us wait to open presents until after we had gone to sacrament meeting, which was always a bummer as a kid. Age ranges. Young single adult now refers to unmarried members ages 18 to 35. Where there is a sufficient number of members, wards may be divided into groups for ages 18 to 25 and then 26 to 35. Now, single adult describes unmarried members ages 36 and older, with some units specifically for those ages 36 to 45. So they've changed this policy, and I've always thought that this was very strange that in a single adult ward, you can have an 18-year-old girl who just graduated from high school in the same ward as a 35-year-old man who's already been divorced and has had some relationship experience, which I've always thought is not okay. And most places where there are young single adults, there aren't enough people to divide those two age groups. The only places that you're going to see that are in Utah and Idaho, specifically around BYU and around BYU, Idaho. So I've always thought that was pretty gross. Changes to temple sealing policies. That's a rabbit hole for another time, you guys. Elders quorum, meeting together, Relief Society may occasionally meet together for Sunday, like all of these things. And then finally, at the very, very bottom of this article, you can see it's the end of the page, number 9. Why were changes made to the church's transgender policy? These updates were made to help local leaders minister more effectively to individuals who identify as transgender and their families. The changes also aim to clarify guidance regarding baptism and confirmation, priesthood ordinances, and temple ordinances, to ensure consistency in policies while allowing local leaders flexibility to minister based on each person's need. You notice it doesn't say what changes were made. It says why were changes made, because they don't want you to look. There's nothing to see here, you guys. Just read this part and move on. It's to make everything easier for everybody. It's fine. More details are provided in the General Handbook in section 38.6.23 and the document linked to that section. See also 26.5.7, 32.14.5, 32.16.1, 38.2.8.6, 38.2.8.9, and 38.2.9.9. Guys, why does Jesus need a handbook that has more than 38 sections, and under each section there are 4 or 5 different subcategories? I don't think that that's necessary, but the church has made it necessary because They are first and foremost a corporation. Like every corporation has a handbook that probably has a similar number of sections. And secondly, if you really want to know what an organization's priorities are, look at their litigation history. Who do they sue? And what lawsuits do they respond to? Again, that's a rabbit hole for another time. But we're going to go ahead and look at all of these sections. We're going to look at all of it because people need to know. When you click on the link that says see also transgender on churchofjesuschrist.org/topics, it says love, inclusion, and respect for all God's children. And we don't even know if any of these individuals in this picture are transgender or not, but I suspect probably not. Then there are two separate sections, understanding and supporting. And if you watched the episode that I released last week on Dallin Oakes's 2019 talk during Women's Conference, you'll understand why this is divided into two separate sections, because there's a big difference between understanding the LGBTQ community and supporting the LGBTQ community. Let's check it out. Understanding yourself. Please tell me how to feel about myself as a transgender individual. Like, I'm not saying that I'm transgender, I'm bisexual, but I'm saying, like, if I were a transgender person, I would be confused as to why church leaders are trying to tell me how to understand myself. So Dallin Oates actually made this statement during that talk, and it's pretty much quoted word for word here. Some people feel their inner sense of gender does not align with their biological sex at birth. The church does not take a position on the causes of these feelings. That's convenient. Some who experience these feelings identify as transgender. And then it gives a reference to the handbook. So rather than go through these questions, which the church has posed as potential questions you might have about yourself if you are transgender, this is how the church wants you to feel. But as I discussed in my episode on Elder Oakes's talk, what the church says and what the church does are two different things. Their words and their actions don't match. They say, you're welcome, but the policies say, go away. So let's just dig into it here. Section 38.6.23. This is the first section that was referenced in the article that was posted on the church newsroom. This is the first place that they want you to come. It says, gender is an essential characteristic in Heavenly Father's plan of happiness. See Genesis 1:27, and that's the scripture where it says that God made man in his image. The intended meaning of gender in the family, a proclamation to the world, is biological sex at birth. That's according to the LDS Church. The family, a proclamation to the world, is something that I am going to do another episode on because there's a lot to unpack there. It is not a rabbit hole for right now, for another day. For those whose biological sex is not clear at birth, see section 38.7.7. Okay, let's go there. Individuals whose sex at birth is not clear. In extremely rare circumstances, a baby is born with genitals that are not clearly male or female, ambiguous genitalia, sexual ambiguity, or intersex. Parents or others may have to make decisions to determine their child's sex with the guidance of competent medical professionals. Decisions about proceeding with medical or surgical intervention are often made in the newborn period. However, they can be delayed unless they are medically necessary. Special compassion and wisdom are required when youth or adults who are born with sexual ambiguity experience emotional conflict regarding the gender decisions made in infancy or childhood and the gender with which they identify. That's a paragraph that I happen to agree with, except I would prefer that they use the term intersex universally. Questions about membership records, priesthood ordination, and temple ordinances for youth or adults who are born intersex should be directed to the office of the First Presidency. So the prophets and apostles want to be the ones who have the final say on all of these things. And bishops certainly aren't trained well enough for this. Stake presidents aren't trained well enough for this. So they really want these kinds of issues to go to the highest level. So I'm glad we checked that out. Some people feel their inner sense of gender does not align with their biological sex at birth. The church does not take a position on the causes of these feelings. Seems like we've read that somewhere before, almost like they're trying to get us to repeat it over and over. Some who experience these feelings identify as transgender. These individuals often face complex challenges. They and their family and friends should be treated with sensitivity, kindness, compassion, and Christ-like love. Let's see if what follows is really kindness, sensitivity, compassion, and Christ-like love. All are children of God and have divine worth. Again, not sure if that's going to play out, but let's go ahead. The ordinances of salvation and exaltation are received according to a person's biological sex at birth. For guidance about administering these ordinances, refer to the following: baptism and confirmation. Let's check it out because, as always, you got to click through all the footnotes to understand these people. So section 38.2.8.9 says baptism, confirmation. Isn't this where we are right now? 32.8.9? No, it's just that we're repeating the same things over and over. Got it. Okay. Any exception to this policy requires the approval of the first presidency. To request approval, the mission president or the stake president for an 8-year-old interviews the person. If he finds the person to be worthy and if he recommends baptism and confirmation, he submits a request for approval to the first presidency using LCR. Time to go to the LDS chatbot. LCR stands for Leader and Clerk Resources, which is an online tool used by leaders and clerks in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is designed to help them manage information and perform their administrative responsibilities more efficiently. With LCR, leaders and clerks can access membership records, manage finances, submit reports, and handle other administrative tasks related to their callings. It's a secure, centralized platform to assist in the effective management and support of local congregations. So I'm guessing this is a portal. It's a secure portal that clerks and leaders can go onto in order to view membership records. And believe me, these guys keep records about every single thing that you do and do not do in the church for the entirety of your membership, which is why one of the reasons why I had my name removed from the records of the church. I'm sure they've still kept all of the records of my time in the church, but they just don't get to count me as a member now. Anyway, all of that being said, the bishop would go onto the LCR portal, look up the members' records, and then submit a request to the first presidency regarding this person's baptism. So back to the footnote here. If the first presidency approves baptism and confirmation, the person will not be able to receive the priesthood, a temple recommend, or some church callings while transitioned. So you can get baptized, but you can't progress any farther than that on the Mormon road. However, the individual may participate in the church in other ways. Individuals who have taken steps to transition and then transition back to their biological sex at birth and are worthy and committed to keeping God's commandments may be baptized and confirmed. And again, who decides if you're worthy? Your bishop and your stake president. Mission presidents or stake presidents for an 8-year-old address individual circumstances with sensitivity and Christ-like love. They seek counsel from the area presidency. Again, they're not suggesting, they're telling you this is how it is. For more information, see section 38.6.23. Is that where we are right now? Yes, that's where we are right now. So I'm not going to go click on that footnote because that's where we are right now. Okay, priesthood ordination. See 38.2.9.9. Priesthood ordination is received according to a person's biological sex at birth. Again, we're going to keep repeating this. A worthy male church member who does not pursue surgical, medical, or social transition away from his biological sex at birth may receive and exercise the priesthood. Again, we're going to see this come up several times as I've been through this before. So as long as you have not pursued any surgical, medical, or social transition, you can receive the priesthood if you're an XY individual. Male members who have taken steps to transition and then transition back to their biological sex at birth and are worthy and committed to keeping God's commandments may receive and exercise the priesthood. Again, repeated from before. Bishops counsel with stake president to address individual circumstances with sensitivity and Christ-like love. Stake and mission presidents seek counsel from the area presidency. For more information, see 38.6.23. We're already in 38.6.23. You guys, they definitely want to make this confusing. It's on purpose, okay? All right, that was priesthood ordination. Let's see, temple ordinances 26.5.7. It's earlier in the handbook with a lower number, which means it hasn't been changed in a while. Temple ordinances are received according to a person's biological sex at birth. Worthy members who do not pursue, say it with me, surgical, medical, or social transition away from their biological sex at birth may receive a temple recommend and temple ordinances. For a definition of social transition, we're going to find it here in this section in a little bit. Members who have taken steps to transition and then transition back, again, same rhetoric, right? If you transition, but then you transition back, then you're good. You can receive all the things. And then it tells bishops to counsel once again. Okay, more of the same gobbledygook being repeated. Worthy individuals who do not pursue, again, say it with me, surgical, medical, or social transition away from their biological sex at birth may enjoy all the privileges of church membership. We're going to hear about what is restricted here in just a second. Church leaders counsel against pursuing surgical, medical, or social transition away from one's biological sex at birth. Here's what social transitioning means. Now we're finally going to get to this definition. Intentionally identifying and presenting oneself as other than one's biological sex at birth may include changing dress, grooming, names, or pronouns. Now this is where I have a big problem. And my friend Evelyn and I discussed this with respect to her son Gray's experience. Because who gets to decide if you're intentionally identifying or presenting yourself as other than your biological sex at birth? I've known many people across the time of my life who have looked outwardly as though they were either non-binary or looked outwardly as though their hair or their grooming, their dress, or whatever did not match what I thought was their biological sex at birth. But does that mean I was correct in my assessment or my judgment of that person? Probably not. And guess what? You don't know unless you ask the question. So this section right here leaves it open to church leaders to determine whether or not they believe someone is intentionally identifying or presenting oneself as other than one's biological sex at birth. They get to decide, and guess how much training they've had? That much. Zero. None. Okay. Maybe there's a letter that goes out. Okay. I do get it. Like, yes, the First Presidency sends a letter out. But is there a live one-on-one interaction where they get to ask questions of the higher up leadership, or whether they get to actually speak to a transgender individual about their experience? No, there's none of that. So unless a bishop has experience in this area, which I'm gonna guess that the number of bishops that have experience in this area is going to be percentage-wise very, very small, because a lot of the bishops, a lot of the people who get called as bishops are older men. Many of them are retired and they have time to serve as a bishop. Many times bishops are chosen based on the amount of tithing that they pay relative to their other male counterparts. So a lot of times you're going to get people in church leadership who are a little bit older, who are making a little bit more money, rather than people who are younger, just starting out in their career, just starting their families for those reasons. The likelihood that the older generation is going to have a lot of exposure to transgender individuals is very small, unless it's someone in their family. Going on with this, it says leaders advise that taking these actions will result in some church membership restrictions. Now, again, I don't know how long you've been following the Mormon Church, but let me just point this out to you. Within the past couple of years, the LDS Church changed the language that they use when they are punishing someone. It used to be that you were disfellowshipped for minor sins, what I consider to be minor sins, and you were excommunicated for major sins. Major sins would include adultery, abuse, and mainly speaking out in activism against church policies or church leaders. That was excommunication. Disfellowshipping was like having sex before you're married, before going to the temple. Like before you go to the temple, a lot of those sins are considered less serious than after you go to the temple and make covenants. So I was disfellowshipped for a while when I was just after high school. And it basically means that you can't speak, sing, perform pray in public in church. Usually you don't take the sacrament. So that's a very public ceremony where everybody's going to see that you're not taking the sacrament. So they're going to know that you're being disfellowshipped or whatever. Then a few years ago, they stopped calling it excommunication and disfellowship. Now they've called it membership withdrawal, which is what excommunication used to be, and membership restrictions. So what they're saying here is that taking these actions will result in some church membership restrictions, the same as disfellowshipping somebody, which means that these individuals will not be able to give a talk or a prayer or a performance of any kind in church. Sometimes they won't even be allowed to take the sacrament like other members do. So my question is, if I'm a transgender individual and I've chosen to socially transition, what's the point of me being a member of the church if I can't speak in a meeting, I can't pray publicly, I can't take the sacrament? Basically, I can't contribute to my church community at all, and I also can't participate in a weekly ritual that all the other members get to participate in. So what's the point? This is when I say that their words and their actions don't match, because that is not loving. That is not kind. What was the other word that they used? That is not sensitive to the experience of transgender people. To exclude them from participating and to exclude them from rituals that all the other members get to partake in no matter what, that's not sensitive, that's not kind, it's not compassionate, and I don't see any Christ-like love in that at all. Yes, they're children of God, but the church is now telling them that they are worth less than members who have not chosen to socially transition. These restrictions include receiving or exercising the priesthood, receiving or using a temple recommend, and serving in some church callings. And we're going to get to how restrictive that is in just a second here. Individuals who transition are welcome to attend sacrament meeting and participate in the church in many other ways. I wouldn't feel very welcome. These individuals and their families are encouraged to counsel with their local church leaders regarding church participation. Again, they're going to make a statement here. It's a declarative statement. They're presenting this as fact. And so if you question this, they're going to refer you back to this factual statement. Church leaders teach gospel truth and minister in a Christ-like way. Well, that's not universally true. I've known plenty of church leaders who teach the gospel and minister in un-Christ-like ways. They consider the needs of all involved. Respectfully, I've had many experiences with church leaders who did not consider the needs of all involved. So to put this as a declarative, truthful statement in here as an absolute is very misleading, and it's not even accurate. Sections of this handbook, such as attendance at church meetings and activities, again, we have another section we're going to have to go look at, participation in family history work, again, there are 2 more rules about this, service to others, yet another rule, and so on, should guide leaders as they counsel with individuals and their families. For further guidance on church participation of individuals who identify as transgender, refer to these guiding principles, which they hyperlink. Obviously, it's a hyperlink, but if you don't go and click on that hyperlink, you are never going to know exactly how the church wants you to handle your interactions with transgender individuals. If you look just at this section without ever clicking on any of the footnotes, you're not even going to come across the most harmful parts of this policy. And most people will read this part of the handbook and they'll say, I don't see anything wrong with the way that the church is handling transgender members. Let's go on, and then we'll come back and look at those in a minute. Members who've taken steps to transition, again, may enjoy all the privileges of church membership. Why do they keep repeating it, you guys? It's because that's a tactic of indoctrination. Circumstances vary greatly from person to person and can change over time. Members who feel their inner sense of gender does not align with their biological sex at birth or who identify as transgender, as well as the parents or guardians of minors facing such circumstances, are encouraged to seek counsel from their bishop. And if their bishop doesn't give them satisfactory counsel, what do? They go to their stake president. What is their stake president going to do? Refer them back to their bishop. If that happens and they feel dissatisfied, they may choose to go to their area authority. What is the area authority going to do? Refer them back to their bishop. If that happens and they feel like they need to take their concern to the first presidency of the church, there are two risks involved in that particular scenario. The quorum of the 12 apostles and the presidents of the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints love to use letters from individual members in their public conference talks that they make twice a year. They love to take these letters from individual people and use them as examples. And there's one particular talk that I'm thinking of where former president of the corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Thomas Monson, read such a letter and then sort of chuckled a little bit and said that he referred that individual back to their bishop. I think he did that more than once in the same talk. And it's sort of this way of shaming people for writing to the first presidency, saying that you really should be handling this stuff with your bishop. And if your bishop gets it wrong, that's not our problem. Especially when members ask really tough and important questions, as was the case with the CES letter. What ended up happening is that letter got passed on and up the leadership and then basically never got answered. The questions never got answered. And the individual was left to just counsel with their bishop, figure it out. That's it. Going on, it says bishops counsel with the stake president to address individual circumstances with sensitivity and Christ-like love. Again, as an absolute, just this is a factual statement. Your experience is going to be exactly this. Stake and mission presidents seek counsel from the area presidency. National and local laws vary regarding individuals who identify as transgender. In the United States and Canada, stake presidents and mission presidents who have questions about legal requirements, not ethical requirements, not social concerns, legal requirements, should contact the church's Office of General Counsel. And then they give two phone numbers for the church's law firm, which is Curtin McConkie. Outside the United States and Canada, these leaders should contact the area legal counsel at the area office. Again, not a therapist, not someone with a PhD in social sciences, not a transgender individual, not any sort of scientific resources or social resources that might be available, not any kind of a foundation that puts out information that is credible about what the best care is to give transgender individuals. An attorney. They want you to contact an attorney. For more information about understanding and supporting individuals who feel their inner sense of gender does not align with their biological sex at birth or who identify as transgender, see transgender on churchofjesuschrist.org, which we've already done. So now I'm going to go back up to click on these super important footnotes. So remember, attendance at church meetings and activities, separate section 38.1.1. A lot of times in this handbook, they're going to start by quoting scripture and give examples from scriptures. And in this case, they're giving examples from Matthew, Ephesians, and the Doctrine and Covenants, where it basically says that the Savior said to welcome everybody and to not be strangers. And then it says all are welcome to attend sacrament meeting. That's not true, because I bet you anything that if I started attending my old ward on a regular basis, eventually somebody's going to come up to me and ask me to leave because of the content that I put out on this podcast. Maybe I'll put that to the test. That's not worth my energy. Let me know what you think. All are welcome to attend sacrament meeting, other Sunday meetings, and social events of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The presiding officer is responsible to ensure that all who attend are respectful of the sacred setting. Yeah, they're going to assume that I'm not going to be respectful of the sacred setting. Those who attend should avoid disruptions or distractions contrary to worship or other purposes of the meeting. All age and behavior requirements of different church meetings and events should be respected. But if you're a visitor, you're not going to know what those are, because a lot of them are social constructs that actually aren't written down in the handbook at all. That requires refraining from overt romantic behavior and from dress or grooming that causes distraction. I bet you anything, if a heterosexual couple was holding hands during sacrament meeting, they would have nothing to say. But if two men are holding hands, they're going to tell them that's overt. You shouldn't be doing that. If two women are holding hands, that's overt. You shouldn't do that. A woman puts her arm around her girlfriend or her wife in church, that's overt. You can't do that. I bet you anything. If these things are happening, guys, please let me know. I want to know how people are actually being treated out there because admittedly, I've had some bad experiences in the church. I also had some good experiences in the church. But I know that the church culture and a lot of people who are in the church, let me just say that most of them are really good people, really wonderful people trying to do the right thing. But there are always those 3 or 4 individuals in a ward congregation, and some 10 or 15 or even more, who don't follow these policies and advice because they are prejudiced against certain groups of people. So your experience at church is going to vary widely depending on your location, depending on the education of your particular congregation, depending on the leadership in that area. I heard some stories about a congregation in Berkeley that was allowing women to sit on the stand with men during sacrament meeting. And when the area presidency found out they were doing that, they made them stop. They made them leave the stand because they didn't deserve to be up there. They were not priesthood holders. So it's like Bishop Roulette. You're going to get a wide variety of experiences. And again, who gets to decide what detracts from the meetings that are focused on the Savior? Whoever's in charge that day. If there is inappropriate behavior, the bishop or stake president gives private counsel in a spirit of love. Although I've seen plenty of videos where people speak out in sacrament meeting on open mic Sunday and they say things that the leadership doesn't approve of, and the leadership comes and tells them to stop talking and escorts them off the stage. That's not private counsel. That's not a spirit of love. That's not how any of that should be handled, in my opinion. Just my opinion, as a lifelong member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who has now resigned. Again, declarative statement. The bishop or stake president, he encourages those whose behavior is improper for the occasion to focus on helping maintain a sacred space for everyone present, with a special emphasis on worshiping Heavenly Father and the Savior. Again, if you've had an experience with this type of counsel, I would love to hear your story. Please contact me at askmegan with 2 E's at gmail.com. Church meeting houses remain private property subject to church policies. Persons unwilling to follow these guidelines will be asked in a respectful way not to attend church meetings and events. I've seen some of these requests for people to leave the church property, and I don't think I would classify it as being a respectful way. Now, is it possible that some people have been respectfully asked to leave? Of course it is, because there are good bishops out there. There are good leaders out there. But if it doesn't happen every time, then we have work to do. We have improvement. And that's why I am critical of an organization. And I think the best way to be loving towards an organization is to point out things that we think are harmful and places where they need to improve. But they don't want to hear that from people like me because I've resigned my membership, so I don't have any credibility anymore. Now, participation in family history work, again, in earlier sections, so this one probably hasn't changed in a long time, 25.1 and 25.4. So basically, we're looking at section 38.6.23. Anything that comes after this number is going to be, those are going to be things that we changed in accordance with this particular policy. If we're seeing earlier numbers, it means that the previous policy regarding participation in family history work hasn't changed, but we're going to go look at it anyway. 25.1 and 25.4. Church members have the privilege and responsibility to help unite their families for eternity. They prepare themselves to make covenants as they receive temple ordinances. They strive to keep those covenants. They also help family members understand, receive, and strive to keep temple covenants. Parents have the primary responsibility to help their children experience the blessings of temple and family history service for deceased family members. Church members are encouraged to identify their deceased relatives who have not received temple ordinances. Members then perform the ordinances on behalf of those relatives. And then it gives a scripture reference. In the spirit world, deceased individuals can choose to accept or reject the ordinances that have been performed for them. We haven't talked about that yet on this channel, but it is a rabbit hole for another day. Members also invite family and friends to learn about their ancestors and discover their stories. Many tools are available to help members in their temple and family history work. Some of these are described in yet another 2 sections. Church leaders support members in their temple and family history efforts as described in 25.2 and 25.3. So this basically is a policy regarding all members who participate in temple and family history work. And so I'm not really sure why they included it here in this section of the handbook, except to say that maybe they're reiterating that if you want to go to the temple to perform ordinances for family history work, then you have to adhere to this policy that they're lining out right here. Family history resources, familysearch.org. This is the same as it is for every member. So again, not sure why they're including it here. And service to others, finally, 22.2.3. If you're still here, thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a lot to unpack. Hopefully, if you've needed to, you've taken a break. This is really difficult for me because the church handbook in and of itself is something I find to be problematic. But going through these policies is really important. And I also think it's important to point out how complicated these policies can be and how a lot of members and leaders probably don't really know how to handle things. And so they come to this handbook looking for guidance, and it's a bunch of going back and forth to look at footnotes, and it's really hard to understand. I think they kind of do that on purpose. The handbook was written by attorneys to keep the church out of legal trouble, basically. I think that's really what it is. It's not written with compassion. It's not written with understanding of individual situations. It's meant to protect the church, essentially. I hope that's what people are understanding from this. Service can be coordinated in the ward stake or community where justserve.org is available. Members and others can use it to identify service opportunities in the community. Again, members should serve others. Like, this is, why do we need to put this in the handbook? Why do we need to include it in the transgender policy? But we have, because we want to be really thorough. Now, finally, the pièce de résistance, the guiding principles, which, you guys, there's no handbook reference on this guiding principles. This is one of the reasons why I have such a problem with this. It's meant to be hidden. It's meant for people not to click on it. And it's just like the gospel topic essays where they mention polygamy in very general terms. But if you want to know what was actually going on in the exact time period, you have to click through a bunch of different links and a bunch of different footnotes to get to the bottom of it, to find out what they're really hiding. So here it is. Guiding principles goes to a completely different page, because this is not part of the handbook. This is a separate piece of paper that talks about guiding principles for local leaders. And this is what they hope that you don't look at, because this stuff is really harmful to transgender individuals. It's copyrighted by Intellectual Reserve Incorporated, which is another corporation owned by the Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is version 8/24, August of 2024. General guidelines. In all cases, local leaders seek spiritual guidance, treat individuals and their families with love and respect while teaching gospel truth. Sometimes those two things conflict with each other, as we heard Dallin Oaks speak about in his 2019 talk to the women, which I did another video on. Again, I'll put it in the show notes for you. Consider the needs of the individual and other ward members, but if the needs of the individual don't align with the policy, then go with the policy. Ensure that the church's doctrine on gender is not undermined or misunderstood. How would they make sure that the doctrine is not misunderstood when it is so difficult to understand anyway? Seek counsel. Bishops counsel with stake presidents. Stake and mission president seeks guidance from the area presidency. Area presidency counsels with the first presidency. It goes up the chain like that. Involve the parents or guardians of minors. I'm really glad that they put that part in there, because I think it's important to have church leaders not making decisions about the treatment of transgender individuals without counseling with parents or guardians. So that's one thing that I'm glad that they put in here. Preferred names and pronouns. Official church records reflect a member's biological sex at birth. How many times are we going to hear those 4 words together? The use of preferred names and pronouns should be a matter left between individuals and their family, friends, and church members. Local leaders should not determine or prescribe how members should address an individual. If a member has a preferred name, it may be noted in the preferred name field on the membership record. But again, not obligated to use it, and leaders are not to direct anyone how they should address an individual. I find this to be particularly hypocritical because if you haven't followed Mormonism for a long time, the president of the Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Russell Nelson, a few years back said that using the name Mormon was a victory for Satan. He said we should use the full name of the church when we're addressing the church. And to this day, when I make posts, especially on other platforms, I say the word Mormon, which, by the way, when I say it, I'm referring to the entirety of Mormonism, meaning all of the different sections of this church that arose after Joseph Smith's death. There are literally dozens and dozens of them. Thousands and thousands of people identify as Mormon, not just people from the Brighamite section, which was taken over by Brigham Young when Joseph Smith died. So you want us to refer to your proper name. You want us to use your full name. You consider the word Mormon to be a dead name. Maybe extend other people the same courtesy. Just saying. Gender-specific meetings and activities. Individuals attend gender-specific meetings and activities that align with their, anyone? Any exception, which should be rare, must adhere to the general guidelines listed above and be approved by the area presidency. That's 2 levels up from the local ward level. That's kind of a big deal. Okay, so I'm just going to speak about gender-specific meetings and activities. When you are a child from the age of 3 to 11, you attend primary Sunday school. Those are gender mixed activities. They're not separated by gender. Once you turn 12, and actually now it's 11, once you turn 11, young men and young women are separated into their separate gender assigned roles of priesthood and learning how to strengthen home and family. Also, on the adult level, men and women usually have Sunday school together, but after Sunday school, they separate into their gendered activities of priesthood or running the church and learning to strengthen home and family. So when they're talking about gender-specific meetings and activities, they're talking about every meeting and every activity that happens for an individual in the church after they turn 11 years old. So it's a lot of activity. Sunday school classes, social activities, all kinds of different things. Overnight activities. For overnight activities that are for a specific gender, individuals attend only the camps that align with their biological sex at birth. Examples of such activities include young women camps and Aaronic priesthood quorum camps. For overnight activities that are not for a specific gender, individuals who pursue surgical, medical, or social transition away from their biological sex at birth leave the activity at night. At night. Is that at sundown, like they used to do for Black people back in the 60s? Who gets to decide what at night is. What time does at night start? If you're at a dance, if you're at a church dance that starts at 7 p.m. and it's in the winter, that's at night already. So are we saying that, well, this is specifically for overnight activities, for activities where they stay overnight. But there are overnight activities that include activities during the daytime as well. So let's come back to this in a second. Obviously, this is upsetting to me. Youth are released to the care of a parent or legal guardian who is responsible for arranging accommodations. Examples of activities that are not for a specific gender include young single adult conferences, for the strength of youth conferences, and youth conferences. So let me just tell you what these are, just in case you're not sure or you're not familiar with church activities. FSY, or for the strength of youth conferences, and youth conferences are for teenagers between the ages of usually 14 and 18, because I think it's still a thing in the church that you're not allowed to go to dances until you're 14 years old. I think, I'm not sure. Because, you know, dancing at the age of 11 is going to put you straight on a path to breaking the law of chastity, guaranteed. Anyway, youth conferences and FSY conferences, typically what happens is the group will get together for the entire day. They'll start early in the morning, usually with a service project, then they'll have some lunch, then they'll go to some classes and do some other activities, then they'll all have dinner together, and there's usually a dance in the evening, and then they stay overnight. At the FSY conferences, these are usually held on college campuses throughout the United States. Youth conferences used to be held at away locations. For example, when I was a young lady in the church, we would go away to a YMCA camp during the wintertime. They called it Frost Valley. It was lots of fun. And they had boys' dorms and girls' dorms. Now they usually have the youth stay in someone's home overnight, one of the members' homes overnight. And sometimes they just don't do a sleepover at all. But in the cases where they do a sleepover, what this new policy states is that transgender individuals who have socially, surgically, or medically transitioned, they have to leave the activity at night. So that means they would go to the service project, they would eat lunch, they would go to the class, they would eat dinner. And then do they have to leave because it's nighttime? Are they allowed to go to the dance? You may have remembered in my friend Evelyn's experience with her son Gray that he went on trek, which is where Mormon youth dress up like pioneers and pull hand carts as they walk, and sometimes they spend the night outside like the pioneers did. And if you remember correctly, Gray had transitioned and they allowed Gray to be at that activity overnight. And it was a wonderful experience for them. Now what they're saying is if there's a trek situation, that individual would have to leave at night. And who gets to decide at night? Again, I'm guessing this is going to be open to some interpretation. Do they get to participate in the dance or not? I don't know. Do they get to, I just realized this opened in a new tab and I haven't been sharing it with you this whole time, and I apologize, everyone. But here it is, and I will put the link to this document in the show notes so that you can look at it for yourselves, because if you are a member, you definitely should. If you love someone who is a trans person who is adjacent to the church, you definitely should. So again, who gets to decide when nighttime is up to, it looks like up to interpretation. And then they just have to come back in the morning, which to me, this policy signifies that they are afraid of transgender individuals spending the night at activities with the youth. And again, as Evelyn pointed out to us, abuse is most likely to happen from straight men, not from transgender teenagers. Transgender teenagers are more likely to be the recipients of violence and abuse, not the perpetrators of it. This is a narrative that we need to change. Transgender individuals are not dangerous. They may be different from you and I, but they're not dangerous. And this is what is so harmful about policies like this, because it signifies to the members, who a lot of them probably don't know any transgender individuals, it signifies to the members that these people are other, You should keep them at arm's length. They're not allowed to do all the same things that we do. Again, this policy is telling transgender people, go away. We don't want you here. Callings and assignments. Individuals who pursue surgical, medical, social transition away from their biological sex at birth are not called or assigned to 1, fulfill gender-specific roles, 2, serve as teachers, or 3, work with children or youth. They may receive other callings or assignments that provide opportunities to progress and serve others. What does this mean? Number 1, fulfilling gender-specific roles means that you can't hold a priesthood calling. So if you are biologically an XX chromosome and you identify as male, you're not allowed to hold the priesthood. So you can't fulfill any of those gender-specific roles. Number 2, you can't serve as a teacher, not at all, not in any capacity whatsoever. And number 3, you can't work with children or youth. Never mind the fact that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still has not instituted background checks for individuals who work with our children, but they're making sure here that no transgender individuals work with your children. Again, transgender individuals are not the dangerous ones. The ones who are most likely to perpetuate abuse and violence are male, straight males. Let's just make sure that we revisit that one more time. Again, another one of the things that I did, I can't even look at my grok history because I went down too many rabbit holes. So one of the things that I did when I was researching this episode is I went to the LDS chatbot, which can be found at ldsbot.com, which is kind of in the beta phase, but it does a pretty good job of giving basic information, but don't expect it to investigate truth claims or any of that kind of stuff. I went to the bot and I asked it, please list all the callings in the LDS church that are not gender specific. And it listed all of the callings. There are 8 of them. But again, if you take out all the ones that are teachers, primary teacher, Sunday school teacher, Relief Society teacher, that takes out 3 of the 8, which leaves 5 that are not gender specific and allow both men and women to serve. Here they are. Ward music director, directing music. Ward choir director, leading the ward choir in preparation for performances. Ward activity committee member, planning activities for the congregation, which they can't attend if they're at night. Just kidding. That's only the overnight ones. Family history consultant, helping members with their genealogy. Ward librarian, managing resources for teaching and auxiliary meetings. And let me just tell you guys, the ward librarian, back in the time that I was in the church, was the calling where you leave sacrament meeting a little bit early so you can go to the library and help teachers get packets of chalk and TVs. It's not a super cool, exciting calling, although some people I'm sure like to hang out in there because it's a super easy one usually, but it's not a position of any kind of authority, obviously, and it's not anything where you're going to get to really participate in church services in a meaningful way. It's handing out chalk and erasers. I guess now it might be whiteboard markers. I don't know. But that's it. So based on my experience in the church, I then asked the bot if the following callings are still part of LDS church service, and they are: ward organist, greeter, ward employment specialist, although that might have a priesthood tie, and ward media representative. So I then asked if any of them required a priesthood calling, and it says no, that they don't. So that's what awaits you if you're a transgender individual, the callings that you're allowed to hold. You can greet people to church. You can do some of the music callings. You can help people with their employment. You can help people with their family history. You can be the ward media representative, which may help or may include helping with public relations or managing communication efforts like promoting events or sharing information about the church in the community. Are they going to trust a transgender individual with that? I don't know. I would be really interested to know if there are any transgender public relations committee members or ward media representatives, people who've been called to that calling. And then again, ward activity committee member and ward librarian. That's it. That's what's available to you as a transgender member if you want to serve in the church. And finally, the worst part of the policy, in my opinion, although I think making teenagers leave their activities at night is pretty terrible. But this affects far more people. Restrooms in church facilities. Restrooms should provide a private and safe environment. Care must be taken to respect the privacy and dignity of all individuals. Really? Really? Because to me, this policy makes it seem like you're just trying to protect the privacy and the dignity of all individuals who have not medically or socially transitioned. Because going on, it says individuals who pursue surgical, medical, or social transition away from the biological sex of birth should use a single occupancy restroom when available. Now, when John DeLynn talked about this policy on Mormon Stories podcast, he was saying he didn't remember there being any single occupancy restrooms, but he's been out of the church for quite a while. And I do remember in my time that there are some single occupancy restrooms. They're normally tagged as handicapped restrooms or family restrooms where there's a changing table so that dads can change babies, as well as moms can change babies, or that families can use the restroom together. So there was more of that. But let's be clear. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has enough money that they could very well afford to put single occupancy restrooms in every single church building that exists on the face of the planet. And they would be no worse off financially. They could do that if it was important to them. But that's not where their priority is. So they haven't done that. And my guess is that they're not going to. Secondly, using a restroom that corresponds to the individual's feeling of their inner sense of gender with a trusted person, ensuring that others are not using the restroom at the same time. So, number one, this implies that transgender individuals are not trusted persons because we can't trust them to use the restroom that they want to use by themselves. They have to have someone with them. That person has to go and make sure that the restroom is clear before the transgender individual enters the restroom. Again, perpetuating these ridiculous societal paranoias where we think that something bad is going to happen if we allow transgender individuals to use the restroom that they feel most comfortable in. And when Evelyn and I were preparing for this episode, we had this conversation. As a female, I don't think there's ever been an instance where I have seen any genitalia in a public restroom. And I would hope that would be the case for everybody. But what are we actually afraid of having happen in here? Because again, we've already identified the group that is most likely to abuse or use violence against other groups, and it's not transgender individuals. It's not. It never has been. Transgender individuals are most likely to be the recipients of violence and abuse, not the perpetrators. Let's just make that very perfectly 100% clear for everyone. So I think I've thoroughly covered what's in the handbook and what's in this supplemental document as far as the changes for transgender individuals who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you stuck with me this long, I really appreciate it. I know this has been a long episode, and especially if this is your first time investigating transgender issues, if this is your first time hearing about policies that affect transgender individuals, and especially if you're someone who doesn't know any transgender individuals, I really appreciate you being here. 100% kudos to you, because I believe there are a lot of people out there who just think that this issue is messy and complicated, it's very sticky, and they don't want to deal with it. So they pretend it doesn't exist. And they keep it off their radar, and they don't listen to episodes like this. So if you're digging into this because you want to be more informed, I salute you, I applaud you, and I'm so grateful to have you here with us today. If you're here because you have a family member or a loved one or a friend who is transgender and you want to understand more about their experience, I am so grateful that you're here. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Thank you for wanting to understand the experiences of people who are different from you. I appreciate it more than you can possibly imagine. And I'm just going to say, the reason I do episodes like this is because I want us beautiful human beings to understand each other. I want us to see each other as human beings. That's it, nothing more than that. I believe that we are all connected to each other. And I believe that when we confront the things that we're ashamed of in ourselves, we will be better able to connect with other individuals and see them as human beings. When we can love all the parts of ourselves, we can love all the parts of other people too. And that's the goal of episodes like this. So thank you for being here with me. Please share this episode with someone you know who needs to hear it. If you're a transgender individual and you want people to understand you, please send them my way. Please like the episode so it will get out to a wider audience so that more people will learn to love and understand all of the human beings on the planet. Thank you for being here. Be good to each other, especially the each others who are different from you. And most of all, be good to yourself.